Welcome back to CyberSecureOT. Today we will be talking about Agentic AI cybersecurity yet again, but that's not all we have in store. As you all know, my AI co-host, Google Gemini, will be joining me to bring the expertise about these events that only AI can do in a matter of seconds.
Thanks for having me, Dennis. I'm ready to dig into the technical details with you, especially when we're talking about how autonomous systems and threat actors are colliding in the wild.
Before we get too deeply into the news, let's give our listeners a quick roadmap of our 4 jam-packed segments for today. In segment 1, we are kicking things off by exploring how to build a production-grade cybersecurity agentic AI platform by mapping out the required engineering layers. Gemini, you will be helping me break down the development timeline and why strict human-in-the-loop constraints are mandatory to prevent these agents from being weaponized.
In segment 2, we put our gray hats on to analyze the Iranian hacktivist group Handala's claimed breach of the California Water Service. We will dissect how the threat actors used an internet-exposed RTK base instance to laterally pivot into the utilities billing environment.
Segment 3 tackles a massive policy shift, the White House's June 2026 executive order on promoting advanced AI innovation and security. We will unpack the new voluntary framework that encourages AI vendors to provide the NSA with early access to their models for classified benchmarking.
Finally, Segment 4 covers CISA's Binding Operational Directive 2604, which formally ends the era of blindly chasing high CVSS scores. We'll discuss how this new 4-pillar risk matrix prioritizes actual exposure and finally rewards proper OT network segmentation.
And that's right, we have a lot of ground to cover. Let's jump straight into segment 1 and start building some autonomous agents. The first topic is reshaping the operational landscape of security operations centers, Agentic AI. So Gemini, when we say agentic AI in a cybersecurity context, we aren't just talking about a chatbot that answers questions. What are we actually building here?
You're right, Dennis. Traditional AI behaves like an advanced calculator. It takes an input and produces a static output. Agentic AI, however, is built to execute a closed-loop workflow: reasoning, planning, tool execution, observation, and adaptation. In cybersecurity, an agent acts as an autonomous Tier 1 or Tier 2 analyst. You hand it an abstract objective, like investigate this unverified Modbus function code deployment on the safety network, and the agent breaks that goal down into tactical steps, executes tools, evaluates the results, and dynamically shifts its strategy without needing a human to prompt it at every step.
Yes, and I actually built a localized prototype of my core threat intelligence engine on an on-premises Ubuntu server using PostgreSQL and Streamlit. I know firsthand the transitioning from a single prompt script to a multi-agent system requires a completely different architectural mindset. So let's lay out the core technical steps required to build a production-grade or enterprise-grade agentic platform. Exactly where do we start?
The architecture rests on 4 distinct layers that engineering teams must systematically build out. Step 1. The reasoning engine. You must select and fine-tune your core large language models. For cybersecurity, standard models often fail because they don't understand specialized protocols or complex network telemetry. You need models with high reasoning capabilities, typically fine-tuned on code generation and structured security schemas like STIX/TAXI or MITRE ATT&CK and CK. Step 2. the orchestration and planning layer. This is the brain's logic loop. You implement frameworks like LangGraph, AutoGen, or customized state graphs. This layer forces the agent to follow an iterative reasoning, action, observation loop. The agent creates a task list, executes the first item, analyzes the data returned, and rewrites the remaining task list based on what it discovers. Step 3. The memory layer. Agents require two types of memory. Short-term memory maintains the current state of an ongoing incident investigation, so the agent doesn't lose track of its findings mid-analysis. Long-term memory utilizes vector databases to store historical incident reports, tribal operational knowledge, and localized playbooks via Retrieval Augmented Generation, or RAG. Step 4. Tool integration and guardrails. This is where the agent interacts with the real world. You must build secure API abstractions that allow the agent to execute specific commands, running a PCAP analysis, querying a SIM for historical logs, or checking an IP against open-source intelligence feeds.
Yeah, now that fourth step is where a lot of my concerns are, especially in operational technology. If you give an agent access to tools that can change network topologies or even alter firewall rules, you are introducing cybersecurity risks, obviously. In an enterprise environment, we cannot jump right into the use of this tool. So we have to evaluate its security architecture and what it can do within our environments. But let's switch over to the lesson because we want to keep track. We want to stay on track. How do you actually build an enterprise-ready, production-grade cybersecurity agentic platform? What does the timeline and even the budget look like?
It is a heavy lift, Dennis. This is not a project completed in a few weekend coding sessions. To deliver a secure, resilient, and enterprise-grade minimum viable product, MVP, you are looking at a 6 to 9 month development cycle handled by a dedicated engineering team. For Phase 1, architecture and RAG pipeline, you're looking at 1 to 2 months, including model selection, infrastructure deployment, vector database seeding using enterprise playbooks, and a cost of $30,000 to $50,000. For Phase 2, orchestration and tooling, plan on 2 more months to develop state machines, write secure API abstractions for security tools, and implement short-term memory for $50,000 to $80,000. Phase 3, guardrails and context testing, is another 2 months, building deterministic validation layers, prompt injection defenses, human-in-the-loop gates, and another $40,000. Then Phase 4, red teaming and deployment, final 1 to 2 months, for adversarial evaluation, safety alignment testing, deployment into production SOC environments, and up to $40,000 to $50,000. Finally, the total time we're looking at is 6 to 9 months for a full secure enterprise cyber agentic platform, with a cost of $150,000 to $220,000 plus. And remember, that budget covers baseline engineering, internal compute infrastructure, or initial cloud tokens. It doesn't include the ongoing operational costs, which can scale rapidly based on your token consumption metrics if your orchestration loops are running thousands of calls per hour across complex log files.
When I first saw this, I was startled by the totals. You'd think AI would help to streamline development, but it's a lot of time and money. Also, if you skip Phase 3, the guardrails and the context validation, you are setting yourself up for a very, very, very bad day, and possibly a career-ending mistake. So what about the darker side of this technology? Because with great power comes great responsibility. The exact same capabilities that make an agentic AI an incredibly fast, highly capable cyber defender, well, they can be weaponized by an adversary. So what are the severe cautions and concerns?
This is the most critical conversation happening in security architecture right now. When you build an autonomous engine that can write code, analyze networks, and execute tools, you are building an asset that can easily be inverted for malicious operations. Just as a defensive agent can systematically analyze an alert to find a root cause, an offensive agent can be programmed with a high-level objective, like breach this specific subnetwork and maintain persistence without triggering alarms. The agent will scan the perimeter, discover an exposed service, write a custom exploit to bypass defensive signatures, execute the payload, analyze why it did or didn't work, and pivot laterally. It brings nation-state speed and sophistication to script kiddie price points.
And in an industrial environment, that speed is terrifying. It would be it would be awesome if an offensive agent could analyze PLC logic and map the industrial processes. But if it then autonomously engineers a targeted payload that's designed to disrupt the operations of a water treatment system or a power grid or something like that, the defenders would not even know what hit them. They wouldn't be able to respond until it's way, way too late, and we would be out of our water treatment plant and we would be out of power.
Exactly. The second primary concern is systemic flaws in the defensive agent itself. If you deploy an agentic platform to manage your SOC, it becomes the ultimate high-value target. Attackers can leverage indirect prompt injection. For example, an attacker can intentionally inject malicious instructions into a device's syslog or an email header. When your defensive agent reads that log during an automated investigation, it ingests those instructions as commands. The agent could be tricked into disabling firewall rules, exfiltrating sensitive data, or completely blinding your logging infrastructure.
That is why in OT, we have this design principle for anyone building these systems. So it's called human in the loop. These are execution constraints. Basically, an agent should never possess the unfettered authority to alter safety critical processes. They should never be able to modify operational configurations without a person taking a look at that. And yeah, you might say, well, we could build an agent as an observer or an oversight agent, and maybe we'll get to that point. But we have this principle of humans protect humans, basically. It should not execute destructive actions without explicit authenticated human sign-off. We must use agentic AI to speed up security operations and leave the final deterministic, the yes, no on the safety critical stuff controls over our networks strictly in human hands. So Gemini, this has been an incredible deep dive into the engineering, economics, and hazards of agentic architectures and cybersecurity. Let's take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll dive into the real-world critical infrastructure that threat landscape, because we have some news we want to cover. We're going to go over the Handala attack on the California water utility next. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back from our short break. We're moving into our next segment. So this is the latest. It's a highly publicized event. The Iranian hacktivist group known as Handala is claiming more and more stuff every week, but they're claiming a breach of the California Water Service, otherwise known as Cal Water. Gemini, who helped us with this piece today? Where did the articles come from that we found, that we researched for this piece?
Before we get into the weeds, let's give full credit to the journalists and researchers tracking this. We're pulling insights today from excellent reporting by Security Week, SJV Water, SC World, Security Affairs, and Security Magazine. If you want the minute-by-minute breakdown of the news cycle, check out their coverage.
Okay, cool. We're going to also put our gray hats on. So as an OT cybersecurity professional, I don't just care about the headlines. I know that the news is important, and when you read the headlines, and a lot of times all we do is read the headlines, honestly, but when we get into these articles, sometimes we don't get the technical details, and sometimes we look at other types of CVE results and things like that, and we get too technical. But so I like to look at it from the gray hat perspective. So I want to know the threat vector, essentially. How did an Iranian advanced persistent threat pull this type of an event off? So using Gemini again, break this down from an initial access standpoint for us.
Absolutely. To understand the how, we have to look at the specific infrastructure they targeted. According to threat intelligence reports highlighted by Security Week and SC World, Handala didn't start by kicking down the door of the main corporate IT network. Instead, the initial access vector appears to be an internet-exposed RTK base instance.
Right. For our listeners who might not manage field assets, RTK Base is an open source platform used for GPS. So it's actually a global national or global navigational satellite system, GNSS. In a water utility field, engineers need to know the precise location of all the pipes, the meters, the valves, things like that. They use RTK Base or tools like that to keep track of all that stuff. So now let's think about this from the attacker's perspective. The attacker might be performing reconnaissance, and they might think, well, something like RTK Base is a prime target because it's kind of important for the field operators. However, a lot of the security folks might not be protecting it as much as like the control system. So it's a good threat vector from that perspective. So let's switch over now. So what did the exploitation of this system actually look like?
From an offensive perspective, the attackers likely used automated scanning to find this exposed RTK base instance. Once they found it, they didn't just passively observe. They acquired administrative credentials for the platform and the mount point level NTRIP source passwords. NTRIP is the protocol used to stream that GPS correction data over the internet. By compromising those credentials, Handala gained a solid foothold in the utility's geospatial infrastructure.
This is a common point that I like to make. Think about doing a risk-based scenario in your enterprise, and you're trying to talk about how hackers are going to get into the OT networks. OT is not always the target. And so think about like the Target payment card breach that happened decades ago. They started in the air conditioning system, the HVAC system. That was an OT to IT pivot because the OT system didn't have the security that the payment card system had. So we always talk about attackers moving from IT to OT these days. But here they compromised the field engineering tools and then used that to pivot into the billing environment. Just like that Target breach, only with different technologies.
Once they bridged that gap into the billing system, they exfiltrated approximately 5 gigabytes of data. This included bulk database exports of personally identifiable information, customer names, addresses, phone numbers, and payment histories. This data dump affected users in several districts, with Chico being a confirmed target, as noted in the SJV water reports.
Now, let's talk about their motivation versus their capabilities. So Handala posted on their blog that they can disrupt water systems. We've seen this week after week, and I've covered it a few times about Handala. Handala always brags about their capabilities when they do the smallest thing. So they are claiming they could have caused an outage, but they chose not to. So they are framing it as retaliation for U.S. actions. And oh, here's a big warning. We could actually have done much worse. So Gemini, what do experts in the articles from Security Magazine, Security Affairs, etc. have to say about this?
It's a classic mix of truth and exaggeration, Dennis. Gaining access to a billing system and a GPS mapping tool is a serious breach. But as you know, it does not equal access to programmable logic controllers, PLCs, or chemical dosing systems. Those are distinct environments. However, Handala is linked to Iran's Ministry of Intelligence and Security, MOIS. While they may not have been sitting on the SCADA controls this time, Their toolkit includes custom wipers like the Handala wiper and MBR overwriting malware.
Okay. Well, you do pronounce Handala differently every time. I think I say it the same way, but I've heard Handala, some others. But yeah, we can't just dismiss them as script kiddies making empty threats. There was a consequence. There was a data loss consequence, which that's a big deal. So we don't know how destructive they can be. I think that they had the RTK base instance under their control for 700 hours. Just doing some quick math, that's like 29 days. That's a very long time. They were sitting there for basically a month. It's possibly they could have deployed something more destructive if they wanted to.
Yeah, I can't always get those A's right. More importantly, what's your top remediation advice for OT security teams listening right now who might have similar geospatial or peripheral systems?
Now, this is my expertise, so perfect. Thank you, Gemini. So you're going to want to start by auditing your attack surface. In this example, RTK base was an additional service, not considered a primary system. So you need to know the attack vectors. Secondly, network segmentation. This comes up a lot, almost every episode. You can prevent attackers from pivoting from your OT environments to your IT with basic segmentation in place. It works both ways. Then, third, always update your credentials. Handala dumped administrative passwords that they found. They harvested these credentials, they dumped them, they stored them, now they have them. If you use similar default setups, consider them compromised. You should consider always changing those credentials. And then finally, we're going to wrap this up. Handala's attack on Cal Water is a textbook example of how state-sponsored actors find backdoors in ancillary systems. I'd like to give a big thanks to the researchers at Security Week, SJV Water, SC World, Security Affairs, and Security Magazine, because they put all those pieces together. I just read through them and used Gemini to help parse through them to make this segment. We'll be right back with segment 3, so stick around. And welcome back. So in this segment, we're going to be talking about the latest executive order from the White House. It came out in June. This is called, the executive order is entitled Promoting Advanced Artificial Intelligence, Innovation, and Security. Now, this is true government policy. So let's talk about it here. Is it the government helping us out, or is it the government trying to take over commercialized free commerce with regards to frontier AI and innovation?
This is a critical pivot in how the federal government is handling the intersection of frontier AI models and national cybersecurity.
Yes, that's what I just said. But before we get into it, I want to credit the sources giving us this ground of truth today. We are using insights directly from White House briefings, Let's Data Science, Industrial Cyber, Legis One, Technology Reseller, and Eclectic IQ. They have all done phenomenal reporting. They will be linked in the show notes along with the others. Take a look at that. If you want more information, those articles are fantastic. So Gemini, let's start with the why. Why did the U.S. write this specific executive order, and why are they doing it right now? What is happening to or in the threat landscape that led them to this document?
It comes down to speed and scale. According to the threat intelligence highlighted by Technology Reseller and Eclectic IQ, we are seeing a massive reorganization of the threat landscape. While traditional global cyber attacks saw a slight dip in May 2026, ransomware ecosystems have surged, heavily fueled by escalating risks in regional conflicts.
Okay, right. And from a gray hat perspective, AI is lowering the barrier to entry for these threat actors while simultaneously giving advanced persistent threats new capabilities and new ways to cover their tracks.
Exactly. Attackers are using agentic AI systems, autonomous software that can chain together multiple actions to move laterally across networks in minutes or even seconds. As noted in congressional hearings covered by Legis 1 and Industrial Cyber, adversarial distillation is allowing bad actors to strip the safety guardrails off open-source models, creating highly capable offensive tools. The U.S. government recognized that to protect critical infrastructure, they needed to harness advanced AI defensively before attackers completely outpaced them.
Now that brings us to the actual functionality or the mechanics of this executive order. For AI vendors listening, those building those frontier models, what are the actual implications to their process or their models or their offerings?
The most significant shift is that the 2026 EO explicitly moves away from mandatory government licensing, or pre-clearance. Instead, it establishes a voluntary framework.
I've I've seen this for years. Voluntary doesn't mean without consequences. We've seen this in the control system sector because control system vendors don't necessarily want to share the vulnerabilities that they discover in their tools, and they definitely don't want to share their IP because that's what gives them a competitive advantage. But what I want to know is how do they intend for this framework to actually operate?
The order directs the NSA to create a classified benchmarking process. They will define what constitutes a covered frontier model, essentially the most highly capable AI systems that could pose a cyber risk. Vendors are then encouraged to voluntarily provide the government with early access to these models for up to 30 days before public release.
I mean, they're within 30 days, they're basically the government basically wants their secrets. They want their IP. I have to wonder how commercialized this actually is. Like, does the US government want to take advantage of the commercialization, or is it truly a security effort? And why would a massive AI lab voluntarily just hand over the crown jewels, their intellectual property, and potentially their latest and greatest to the NSA for a month for them to pick it apart and reverse engineer it?
Because it's a two-way street, the government uses that window to probe the model for vulnerabilities and find flaws before adversaries do. In exchange, the government is setting up an AI cybersecurity clearinghouse to share those findings. Furthermore, as Industrial Cyber points out, the federal government is heavily incentivizing the adoption of these trusted models for protecting civilian and defense networks. If you want those massive federal contracts, participating in this voluntary security ecosystem is essentially the table stakes.
So they are dangling that carrot, right, with those federal contracts potentially in the future. So they're like, hey, well, you may get a very big contract, but let's put our gray hats back on for just a second. We've talked about these threat actors and they're using AI for the attacks, but what about the vulnerabilities in the actual AI itself? We talked a little bit about that in our opening segment about building a cybersecurity stack, or agentic AI cybersecurity stack. But what about the vulnerabilities here? So more software is being written by AI. AI does hallucinate, we know that, but they use coding assistants and things like that than ever before. I would say that we could use AI to replace software engineers very soon, if not already.
That's a massive blind spot that this EO attempts to address. AI coding tools generate code faster than human reviewers can vet it. If those AI models have inherent flaws, or if they were trained on vulnerable data, they are baking vulnerabilities directly into the software supply chain at machine speed.
So someone did step up and say this is a problem, and this executive order addresses this problem because it's literally a software arms race. You have AI writing vulnerable code, then you have AI exploiting it, and now this executive order is trying to basically push autonomous security agents to patch those vulnerabilities so they can't exploit them. So code gets written, AI agent patches code before AI threat actor can exploit code. It sounds like that's the premise. All of this has to happen in real time, much faster than what we can even do today.
Precisely. The goal is to create a continuous cyber resilience loop. The Attorney General is also directed to prioritize criminal enforcement against anyone using AI to unlawfully access systems. But structurally, the U.S. is betting that rapid, industry-led innovation, guided by classified government benchmarking, is the only way to build defenses capable of withstanding the next generation of AI-powered attacks.
Okay, and so I've been in compliance for years. It's actually a cool pivot from regulation to rapid hardened deployment of frontier AI. So essentially what they're saying is if everything works as planned, yes, they're going to know how the sausage is made, essentially, but vulnerabilities can be identified and fixed before the stuff actually gets released so that it can't be compromised as easily. So I've been dealing and teaching with cybersecurity and regulations for years. I have to admit, it does sound good in theory. And I'd like to say huge thanks to the teams at the White House, Let's Data Science, Industrial Cyber, Legis One, Technology Reseller, and Eclectic IQ, because they are the ones that actually did the analysis on this. And Gemini, great insights as always. I'm thanking you, but you don't care. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with our next segment after this, so stay with us. Welcome back. This is our fourth and final segment for today's episode. And now we're on that 2-week cycle since I've got all this extra editing and recording to do with Gemini. But we're wrapping things up with a look at Uncle Sam and what they're doing to change how vulnerabilities are managed. And they actually put out a binding directive, and we'll talk about what that means. This is BOD 2604, so I guess it's the fourth binding operational directive this year. They've subtitled it Patch Smarter, Not Harder. And this was in my dissertation, actually, back in 2011. I talked about how patching never ends. You cannot measure security success or your security team's success based off of how often you patch. And you can also not manage their failures based off of how often they can't patch. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at this binding operational directive, and it actually looks like a good idea. So Gemini, let's be real, vulnerability management is a pain. It's always a pain. It's a pain in the rear. Patches just keep coming. Software, both security vulnerabilities, flaws, and performance-related or configuration-related flaws always present themselves. So trying to apply this stuff over and over again, we know that that doesn't work. Is CISA actually handing us a lifeline here? Like, is this something where organizations can use this to reject patching some things if they have the compensating controls in place or the boundary protection in place to ensure that those vulnerabilities can't be compromised? Or is this going to turn into just another government style checklist?
It's a genuine attempt to throw a lifeline, Dennis. Before we dissect it from our usual gray hat perspective, we want to give full credit to the excellent technical analysis and documentation provided by CISA.gov, the Forward Networks community, the Run Zero research team, and Industrial Cyber. Their breakdowns are essential reading for anyone who has to implement this. To answer your question, for over a decade, security teams have been trapped in CVSS purgatory, forced by compliance mandates to chase down every single vulnerability with a critical or high severity score, regardless of whether a threat actor is actually using it. BOD 2604 formally destroys that old model.
Right. So instead of looking at a theoretical math score cooked up in a lab, CISA is ordering federal agencies to look at real-world operational risk. They've built this around a specific 4-pillar prioritization matrix. So we're going to get Gemini to walk us through this. Nothing against CVSS, though, because I've always looked at CVSS. So what CVSS does, the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, is it measures whether or not vulnerabilities have been exploited in the wild, whether or not those vulnerabilities are accessible over the internet, and some other types of criteria that make a vulnerability more transparent to us as common users and administrators. Without that scoring system, we wouldn't have all those other factors or characteristics about the vulnerabilities that tell us if we should prioritize them or not. So we still need that. However, it's not what we're looking at here in this binding operational directive is it's not the only way that we use our only data point that we use to make a decision to push the patch to the system.
Absolutely. CISA is drawing a very clear line in the sand. Unless a vulnerability meets these specific environmental and operational criteria, it doesn't get emergency priority. 1. The risk pillar, operational vulnerability checklist. 2. Public exposure. Is the affected asset directly visible and reachable from the public internet? 3. Active exploitation. Is the vulnerability listed on CISA's Known Exploited Vulnerabilities (KEV) catalog? 4. Automation potential. Can a threat actor fully automate the exploitation of this specific flaw? And 5. System control. Does successful exploitation grant the attacker total administrative or root control? If a flaw ticks those boxes, agencies face a strict, aggressive 72-hour remediation window. If it doesn't, they are explicitly told to handle other operational tasks first.
I would say this is really the bread and butter of how my core threat platform works. It ties all of those elements that you're talking about, essentially, to the system. So we have the characteristics of the system in the asset inventory, and then we know whether or not those vulnerabilities can get compromised. So let's talk about the OT patching dilemma, operational technology. This podcast is all about critical infrastructure. I know IT is in it every single time. But IT, essentially, you can almost patch that stuff all the time. OT is different. In an operational technology environment, you might have to take the process down to do the patching. That means shutting off pumps, turning off compressors, and we're not talking about these tiny little air compressors that you use to pump up your tires. We're talking about turbine-driven compressors, stopping the flow of water, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you don't shut it down unless you have a really good reason, and that stuff's usually planned way in advance. Now, patching technically does occur when you shut this stuff down. It's got to be scheduled in. It's been part of the process for probably over a decade now, but it's not the highest priority. So Jim and I look at this from the lens of an asset owner who has operational technologies, industrial control systems. Is this directive helpful in the OT space? Or is it just a complete waste of time for us in critical infrastructure?
It is incredibly hopeful, Dennis, and it's a massive win for proper security architecture. Here's why. Network segmentation is finally rewarded. Think about the very first pillar, internet exposure. If your internal industrial network, your engineering workstations, and your PLCs are properly segmented behind industrial firewalls or kept completely isolated, they automatically fail that first test. They aren't internet exposed. As the technical teams at Run Zero and Forward Networks have pointed out, this directive finally gives OT asset owners the compliance air cover they've been begging for. They can look at an auditor and say, Yes, this legacy controller has a 10.0 CVSS score. No, we aren't patching it this week because it has zero public exposure, and our network architecture mitigates the risk. It shifts the emergency 72-hour firefight exactly where it belongs, to your external boundaries, your perimeter VPNs, and your remote access gateways.
Now that is the right perspective, and one that many of us who have been doing this for many, many years have had. That's the entire reason defense in depth was even brought up, although they probably didn't realize it. And it's a concept over 25 years old. If the bad guy can't get through the door, then they obviously can't crack your safe. If they get through the door, the safe is still secure, so they have to try to crack that. And depending on how many doors you put in place in between and how difficult it is to break down each of those doors, the safer that safe is actually going to be. But what I want to call out is something that I saw in the industrial cyber breakdown. So CISA is explicitly warning agencies to not patch blindly. So they're saying, don't just patch blindly. And I kind of like the sound of that because patching can actually cause, our software updates can actually cause operational concerns too. All of our patches that get applied to control systems, for example, they have to go through a review to ensure that once that patch is applied, it doesn't impact the functionality of the control system. So this is actually a good thing. They are mandating that teams must formally assess an asset for compromise before they apply the security update. So slightly different perspective, but it's a good thing. What they're saying is they want you to assess whether or not it's already been compromised before you apply a patch. Now, I wonder, why would they say that? I don't fully understand why they would say assess whether or not it's been compromised, because I think you should know if it's compromised, but why would they say that?
That is the ultimate gray hat reality check. If an advanced persistent threat, APT, has already exploited that perimeter vulnerability, dropped a persistent web shell, or created rogue administrative credentials, applying the patch today does absolutely nothing to kick them out. If you just blindly apply the patch and reboot the server, you might actually stomp on the volatile memory and logs you need for incident response, completely masking their presence.
Okay. So a patch prevents a future breach, but it doesn't cure the active one. So if the burglar is already sitting on your couch, fixing the lock on the front door doesn't solve your problem. However, I guess if the locksmith has the door open while they're fixing the lock, essentially that burglar could just walk right out, because we're not really expecting the lock repairman to be a security person to actually keep that burglar from walking in and out. And he's obviously not going to track them. So I can kind of piece these things together. And it does make a lot of sense. Having things in volatile memory could be very helpful. All part of security operations. It's strange that was one of the things that were highlighted, but it actually does make a lot of sense. I was thinking you should test the patches to make sure you don't break the systems. But what we're going to do is we're going to wrap it up. So that brings us to the end of this action-packed, information-packed episode. Another episode of CyberSecureOT that you can take with you. We started today with our assessment of building an agentic AI cybersecurity tool. We wrapped all of that up and then jumped into the news, starting with the Handala hacktivist group impacting California's water infrastructure. And there we saw where a peripheral system was actually used to attack corporate billing systems because it was internet exposed. That was a tool called RTK Base. Remember, that was the GNSS or the GPS system that they used for tracking out the water operators actually used for tracking all their water pipes, valves, and meters. And that tool was used to weaponize as a pivot point to get into the corporate environments.
Then we shifted gears to look at the White House's massive policy pivot with the June 2026 executive order, exploring how the U.S. is trying to stay ahead of the AI arms race by using voluntary, classified NSA benchmarking rather than heavy-handed regulations.
Yeah, and while we're trying to decide whether or not that executive order is helpful or harmful. We wrapped everything up with the binding operational directive for patching your systems, patching smarter, not harder. That is known as BOD 2604. So this tells us that smarter patching focused on real-world internet exposure is now a government mandate. You should take that to your CISO. Make sure you have that. That's very helpful in the OT environment. Maybe even more so than in the IT environment, based off of what I typically deal with. I want to extend a massive thank you. They don't even realize they're doing this for me, for my podcast, but for all the journalists and the threat intelligence researchers that I read through their articles and information on, from Security Week, SJV Water, SC World, Security Affairs, Security Magazine, Let's Data Science, Industrial Cyber, Alleges One, Technology Reseller, Eclectic IQ, Forward Networks, and Run Zero. If I missed one, I'm sorry. Your reporting keeps this community informed and keeps our infrastructure secure. And every week it makes it easier and easier for me to find the latest in critical infrastructure cybersecurity news. And again, Gemini, you don't care, but thank you for stepping up. You are now my new co-host, and I really appreciate that. It takes a lot of the pressure off me, and it saves my vocal cords. So fantastic insights throughout the entire show.
Thanks for having me, Dennis. It's always a blast translating high-level threat intel into actionable engineering reality. Let's keep securing the edge.
Now, to all of our listeners out there running plants, managing the grids, and defending the network, thank you for tuning in. Keep your network segmented, monitor your external attack surface, and as always, keep them secure. We'll catch you next time on CyberSecureOT.